Good afternoon. Today, I'm joined by a friend of mine called Yamama Oraibi. Yamama is someone I've known for a few years, and I've been thinking a lot regarding the youth unemployment crisis that the world faces. And in fact, before the COVID pandemic took hold, it was already an issue. And I think things have been exacerbated, and the situation is much worse. What Yamama has done is dedicated quite a portion of her career to thinking about how you fix these kind of problems. She's currently the CEO of an entity called Generation in the UAE, who does some really interesting work around the world on how they tackle employment for young people. Yamama, welcome to this live stream. And what I want to start off by asking you is, how bad is the situation today as a result of COVID for young people?
Particularly bad, especially because you said young people. But firstly, hi, Vikas. Thank you for hosting me. So yeah, I think for young people it's particularly bad because if you look at the people who are being laid off as a result of COVID, it disproportionately includes women, minorities, and young people. And if we look at the MENA region, where I'm from, where I'm currently based, the Middle East, North Africa, we've had the highest rates of youth unemployment for the past 20, 25 years, depending on who you quote. Okay, and obviously COVID coming and the fact that it's disproportionately affecting young people is further amplifying that challenge.
And so, Yamama, but in terms of, when I think about the challenge, especially in the MENA region, why has it been such a crisis situation for the last 2 decades?
Various reasons. I mean, you also don't want to stereotype the Middle East, North Africa as one entity. It's made up of very different economies, different contexts, different political structures. I think being of Iraqi background, the first thing that comes to mind is conflict, unfortunately. So I think a lot of the countries in the Middle East in the past 20 years have suffered from one type of conflict or another. And obviously conflict affects the economy. So it limits the opportunities and limits people's confidence. All the ramifications of conflict. I think another reason is the way the education sector is set up, the way the education systems are set up. It's very much based on rote memorization. I would say that young people may graduate with strong academic skills. They may know their maths very well, but they don't have the skill set that the labor market is asking for. Now, that's not particularly unique to the Middle East and North Africa. Wherever you go around, that's something that the private sector is always telling you, we're not getting the skill set we need. I've been working in the region for the past 15 years on this topic, and unfortunately, the conversation seems to be pretty much the same in the last 15 years, which is disheartening, despite the tremendous, efforts that some governments have put in, some educational systems, some NGOs, they've been, but I don't want it to be all doom and gloom. I think there've been some areas where we've progressed a lot. If we think about female education attainment compared to maybe 30 or 40 years ago, or literacy overall. But I think one of the reasons that's compounding the youth unemployment is this mismatch between what the education system is producing and what the labor market is asking for.
I mean, it's quite an indictment of the university sector. And so in terms of—
You cut out a bit. You said it's an indictment of
the university sector. And, what do you think their response is?
I think different things. Sometimes they blame it on the private sector, that the private sector don't talk to us enough, that, we don't know exactly what they want, or they keep changing their minds. I think another reality is, the dynamics of the labor market and what it needs changes so quickly, particularly now in the past maybe 10, 15 years, if you think about technology. Like you think about when you and I graduated, some of the jobs that are available today weren't available then. So there is no way something as large and as bureaucratic as an education system is going to keep up at the same pace. So I think some of the changes the universities are struggling with. Sometimes it could be also political will, could be resources. These are the different things. And also what young people also gravitating towards. One of the things that working in the Middle East, one of the challenges is a chunk of young people, you obviously can't say all of them, but a proportion of young people, they want government jobs. So they want to go to their safe university degrees that are going to get them those safe government jobs that their parents have instilled in them are like safe and secure. In some Arab countries, they actually may not pay as much as the private sector. In others, they pay more, but it's safe, it's secure, it's what their parents' generation knew, it's what their teachers knew, and it's what they've been fed. So again, the university is responding to those demands that this is what parents and students want. These are the kind of degrees they want.
And so, Yamama, tell us about your current employer, so Generation. How are they addressing the challenge differently to other people?
I think there's different ways we're addressing it differently in terms of Generation globally. So one is we started off based on very solid research. So Generation was born out of a study that McKinsey & Co. did about 6 years ago, where they surveyed 15,000 employment programs in 150 employment programs in 25 countries, speaking to 15,000 employers, job seekers, education providers. And what we found is, and you know this, youth unemployment or youth employment, it's a puzzle of different pieces, right? And as I mentioned before, there are some fantastic programs out there doing great stuff, but they're like addressing one piece of the puzzle. So it could be the training, it could be the placement, it could be how do you write a CV, it could be the mentorship. And you're looking really, the way to sort of crack it is to have this holistic, integrated solution. So I think what makes Generation stand out is several things. One is our starting point is always employers. So when we're starting in a new city, a new economy, we're talking to employers and saying, what are the skills you need? Because there's no point in us training and tracking metrics on 10,000 youth being trained if they're not going to get employed. So we very much align our training to what employers are asking for. Once we understand within a given economy or sector, what are the jobs that are in demand? What's going to get us at scale? Because I think this is also one of the objectives of Generation is to ensure youth employment at scale. Like I said, there's lots of very niche organizations, but you want to get this at scale. So once we understand the skill set and the professions that are needed, then we work very closely with employers. We shadow their top performing employees. We have lots of conversations with employers, with employees themselves. We track what are called breakdown moments. What distinguishes a good employee from maybe a lower performing one. And then we create these boot camps, 4 to 12 weeks, depending on the profession, where 70% of the boot camp is very practical. So it's practicing those breakdown moments, real life scenarios, simulation. For example, if we're doing a frontline retail program, we will take them into a supermarket, during a real life day and get them to work on this. So like I said, linking it to what employers want, making it very practical based, the boot camps, and integrating in the sense that it's behavioral, mindset, and the technical skills they need to succeed on the job.
So, it's Yamama. I apologize for the feedback you're hearing. Where in the world are you busy at the moment?
So we're in 14 countries. We're in the US, the UK, Hong Kong, Singapore, Brazil. You'll have to excuse me, I'm going to read this just to make sure I don't miss a country. Australia, France, India, Italy, Kenya, Mexico, Pakistan, Spain, and the United Arab Emirates.
And if you were to fast forward to, say, 5 years or 10 years' time, what will we be celebrating as a result of Generation's impact?
Hopefully a few things. One of them is people who have traditionally been disconnected or marginalized from the labor market have been able to achieve life-changing careers that otherwise would have been inaccessible to them. Another thing is that employer bias or employer perceptions would have shifted. So one of the things we work with as employers is when they're looking to fill certain vacancies, there's a profile they have in their mind. A lot of the times they gravitate towards university graduates, when sometimes the jobs they're needing or the skill set they're needing doesn't necessarily need a university degree. So we hope in 5 to 10 years is to change the system, the education to employment system, where, like I said, what employers are asking for, the perceptions, the implicit biases they have been shifted. And also young people and potentially mid-career people, because that's something we also work with in Generation. We've started the past 2 years, people who are at risk of losing their jobs due to automation. We think we help them reskill for the emerging labor market or the economy. So we're hoping in 5 to 10 years is that those people have felt marginalized, who haven't got the opportunity that they deserve due to maybe lack of the right university degree or not being even able to get a university degree, they get this meaningful life-changing career that enhances not just their livelihood in terms of financial, but also their mental well-being and that of their family.
So, Yamama, when I think about your background in terms of not just with generation, but prior to this, you were pretty much plugged into the school sector through your work with Teach for All, as an example. One of the criticisms that I think people have is that we start too late when it comes to thinking about employment, post-education. Do you think there's a case that actually we need to be embracing kindergarten all the way through to year 12 students in this journey a lot more effectively?
Yes, but I wouldn't maybe term it in terms of employment, because I think one of the things that I find a bit sad is now when people talk about education, it's always very much in dollar terms, right? Like, what is this education? What job is it going to get me? And I'm not so idealistic to say that education is just for the learning knowledge sake. Of course, people need to earn a livelihood. They need to have financial stability. So going back to your question, I think if we term it in terms of skill set, what do you need to thrive in the modern age, be it in a job or outside a job? I think definitely, I've got 2 young kids myself, and you alluded to my background. I had initially, my work had very much focused on secondary schools and universities. And it's only when I had kids on my own who are now in kindergarten that I realized how important the early learning phase of a young person's life is. And so definitely, I think you can't start too young in terms of the skill set, but I personally would shy away from linking it directly to employment.
And Yamama, when we think about, because of all my work around the teacher workforce, and obviously yours as well, what advice would you give to the teacher workforce, teachers from around the world? So I notice on the chat here today, we have people all the way from, for example, Ragam from Egypt, from Rogelio from the Philippines, we have friends from Nigeria, we have friends from all over the world joining us. Tell me, in terms of, what advice or what tips would you have, could you give to teachers as to how they could contribute towards your success?
First of all, can I just say that I've always loved teachers, but now that I've had to teach my kids at home, I love you even more. Okay, I need to say that. It may sound a bit cliche, but it's to really understand each child. And I know it's easier said than done if you're a teacher in a class of 45 or 50, right? But if there is somehow you can get through and just understand each child, what motivates them, what excites them, what makes them happy, and to give them that confidence, to give them that push. I ran an NGO in Syria for 5 years, where very much we were going into public schools in 5 major cities every single day for 5 years during the academic years. And the one thing I will say that came out, regardless of the students' background, regardless of what they were studying, regardless of the socioeconomic environment of the school, it's those young people came alive when you just gave them that little nudge that showed them there's somebody listening to you, there's somebody caring and trying to look for that innate talent that you have. And they just thrived. At least that's what we saw in Syria and what I've seen in other Arab countries. So I'd say that to teachers, just try to understand the child as much as possible and motivate them in the way that speaks to them.
So if you, from all the different skill sets that you look at in terms of from your employment programs, which are the really popular ones you're seeing in the MENA region in particular, there being a demand from employers as well as a huge interest from young people to take on these skills?
I think tech skills are definitely an emerging one, especially now also in light of COVID. Yes. I think maybe some sectors in the Middle East were slower than other parts of the world to digitize, and COVID has forced them to make that change, has to realize. And of course, anything with technology excites young people. So, those are the kind of jobs young people are very excited about, they want to get into. Sometimes they may be a bit overwhelmed by it because it's a sector that, the people they look up towards, parents, uncles, neighbors, what have you, maybe don't have the expertise. So in the one hand, they're very excited by it, but also on the other hand, sometimes they're like, a bit overwhelmed, a bit wary, like how do I get into it? And I think, yeah, employers now, when we're speaking to them, it's so much about the technological skills. There's obviously a lot of behavioral skills, soft skills, things we know, like everybody talks about creativity now. How do you collaborate with others? How do you collaborate across borders, across authority lines? But I think one of the things we're hearing very much right now is the tech skills.
Yamama, I want to go on to the last segment of this live stream, where we want to focus on you a little bit. You as a leader, we've talked about a little bit. The pandemic has resulted in many different ways of doing things being realized, and actually lots of creativity coming to the fore. Can you tell us, in terms of firstly what your experience during this period has been, and secondly about can you tell us if you feel optimistic about anything coming out of this?
So there's the personal experience and the professional experience. The personal experience during this, as I alluded to, is homeschooling my children. That's been a real eye-opener. An eye-opener about, my kids are 4 and 5.5. So it's a real eye-opener at how to engage the kids at that young age, getting them excited. But it's a real also eye-opener how they're like sponges. They just lap up everything. If you deliver it the right way, as I'm trying to find out and crack, if you deliver it the right, they just lap it up. So that, I think, is what on the personal space, what I've been learning specifically in terms of how young people learn. And then I think on the professional space is just, how much you can actually, I feel like I'm going to shoot myself in the foot here, but actually how much you can do virtually, right? I think if we, a lot of the times we thought we had to do things in person. Generation's a global organization. I had a lot of colleagues flying in who I miss tremendously. So by no means am I saying I don't want them to fly in when this is all over. But it's phenomenal how productive we've still been able to be amongst each other as a generation, with our partners, with our learners, virtually. So that's been a real pleasure.
So I mean, that begs the next question, which is to do with, do you think we're going to go back to, if I just take schooling, because a lot of people are interested in will be interested in your view on that, saying that all this disruption that's happened, all this homeschooling that's happened, how do you think schools are going to change as a result of this?
So here in the UAE, they've actually been speaking about, come September, what will schools look like? And nobody really knows, because obviously the health situation is dictating that. One idea that has been floating about is to have like a 50-50 or 70-30 approach, where 30% of kids are at home at any given time doing online learning, and then the rest going back to schools. I see that working for the older age groups. I think, speaking at least to teachers who are teaching primary kids, and to parents, they are all hopeful and desperate, I would say, for kids to go back to brick and mortar. I think for the older age group, I think schools have realized, like I said, that you can do a lot virtually, that some of the things that maybe teachers were hesitant about, COVID has forced them to take on. And so just even in terms of their know-how when it comes to technology platforms, Google Meet, Teams, all those kind of things. So I think schools will continue to do that. Another thing is for example, private tutors. So I've spoken to a few people who teach languages. My kids are actually doing French language with a teacher in England, right? And she said, even for her students who are in England right now, the parents are like, actually, you know what? This is working really well on Zoom. Even when this is all over, can we continue on Zoom? Because it saves us driving over to you. It saves or you coming to us and all that stuff. So I think what I see in terms of the future is that the schools who will succeed are the ones who are going to take what's the best learnings that have come out of this virtual distance learning, and keep those, enhance those, but also realize that not everything can be done virtually, particularly for the younger ages. And so, that nothing beats having a teacher in life. Nothing beats interaction or playing with your friends, learning through play. And a lot of that gets lost at home.
So you were telling me before we started this live stream that you were part of the T4 conference that was held a couple of weeks ago. Not wanting to obviously toot my own horn, but your opinion is really valued because of your body of work and your interest. What are the key things that came out of that for you?
I was just so engaged. And I think I reached out to you to say that. Like,
Yeah.
I myself was surprised by how I wasn't distracted by other things, you know. I was so plugged in. And it's obviously credit to the fantastic lineup, to the content that you and the other co-organizers have put together, to the phenomenal speakers you've had, that here I am at home with all the distractions. It was just Saturday, so it's like a weekend. And yet the content and the speakers just drew me in. And I think also like the flow of information and the flow of the sessions just made so much sense. And, you know, obviously some speakers had more impact on me personally than others. But I think what that also proved is something I had mentioned earlier, which is a year ago, if you said to me, do you want to attend an education conference online? I'd be like, no, could we please just go in person, right? And I think this has pushed me out of my comfort zone, challenged my perceptions and my biases. Say that if you do have very strong content, if you do have the right speakers, if you reach out to the right audiences, you can do phenomenal things online.
Well, Yamama, thank you so much for your time today. You know, I'm sure the community that is watching this, including, I'm told, many members of your family and your friend circle that your sister was WhatsApping me about, you know, will value your views on how we tackle this major issue. And I'm sure that we'll be asking you back for a temperature check as to, well, what are we going to be celebrating in 5 and 10 years' time? But until then, I wish you well, and thank you so much for participating in this live stream.
Thank you, Vikas. And what I want to say is thank you for putting together that conference, and thank you for the talks you've been holding ever since. I've been actually tracking those, and it's I think the diversity of voices you've brought to each one of us at home has been very enriching. I think it could have been easy for us to feel disconnected. And I think when it comes to young people and education, you've helped us keep that connection.
You're very kind. Thank you so much.
Thank you.